I mean, the Pretoria News, for example, is now selling less than 2,000 copies a day. At that level, one wonders what the logistics are in terms of even turning on the presses.
Is the media suffering from a crisis of credibility? Well, Kanthan Pillay, media and technology entrepreneur, joins us to discuss this topic. Kanthan, welcome to the CRA channel. Could you tell our viewers where the media finds itself at this current moment?
If you're talking specifically in terms of South African media, or you're talking in terms of global media, David, I guess to a large extent, I think that all of them slot into the same category in the sense that I think that there is a crisis of credibility across the board to a large extent. And I think that's pretty much a global phenomenon that's come about over the past year. It's been pretty much exacerbated by a number of things. COVID, I think, was a large trigger based on the fact that there were obvious ideological lines that were drawn in terms of messaging that came out of COVID. And then the US elections followed thereafter. And to a large extent, we've seen that replicated in our country to some extent.
We live in uncertain times. Click here to find out how the CRA can help you to understand, prepare, and prosper.
So, Kanthan, let's turn now to the South African context. What is your assessment of the media landscape, both in terms of print, broadcast, and particularly focusing on the traditional media?
Well, I think let's look to the numbers. And I think a good starting point is to take a look at what has been happening, particularly in terms of the print media, which for the longest time in the history of this country, the print media was probably the place where you could look to for credible information, reliable information at any given stage. Now, if you break down the various media houses that we have in the country right now, effectively, we have independent newspapers stable, we have the Naspers stable, and then we have whatever Times Media now calls itself. They've gone through so many name changes over the years that I've kind of lost track of them. And I think that's actually a microcosm of what happens in the larger media space. So if we start talking about broadcast shortly, to a large extent, those patterns replicate themselves. So everyone in the print media space right now, the mainstream print media space, is to some extent compromised. When I say that they're compromised, it means that they have allegiances to particular factions of our ruling elite to some extent. So if you take the case of Times Media as an example, ultimately that is an ANC faction that in terms of its ownership structure is headed up by Jabu Moleketi and others who are part of that particular faction of the ANC. We have Naspers with Puti Manyala heading up Naspers. And I think we can very clearly say that she is firmly part of Team Ramaphosa. We have the independent group, and one could say that they are very clearly in Team Jacob Zuma to a large extent. So with the Iqbal survey at the head out there. And the net result we have seen has been in the dramatic drop in terms of their circulation figures over the past period. I mean, the Pretoria News, for example, is now selling less than 2,000 copies a day. At that level, one wonders what the logistics are in terms of even turning on the presses, because you've lost money before the first copy actually rolls off. This is something that's been replicated across the board. There are multiple reasons for that. The one is that people don't want to roll down their windows of their cars anymore and buy newspapers. So I'll cut them some slack. But primarily, there isn't a reason why one would want to actually pick up any of those publications, because there isn't a must-read factor that goes with it anymore. To a large extent, that's because of the fact that people are aware of the fact that there are particular allegiances in terms of the way in which those stories get told. So where does that leave the media right now in terms of the broad brushstrokes? I often tell people that if you have a situation where CNN, the BBC, Russia Today, France 24, China News Daily, NDTV in India are all reporting exactly the same thing, then you can probably trust that it's true. But it actually means that you have to be following every single one of them and to try and look for the common threads and get a sense of what's actually happening. And at the same time, you must also take the view that if a particular publication is Team Ramaphosa, then they are going to be out of their way to dig up dirt on Team Zuma. And therefore, if they're publishing things about Team Zuma, it's probably true. Correspondingly, if you have Team Zuma publishing something negative about Team Ramaphosa, again, it's probably true at the level that if it was not true, it would be actionable. So I don't know if that paints a picture of a media in crisis. Well, actually, I think what we really have is people not willing to spend enough time of the day paying attention to all of these various sources to try and ferret out the truth. And so there's, I guess, a propensity to just switch off.
So the alternative to switching off, Kanthan, is to look to outside of the mainstream for sources of information and analysis. We at the Center for Risk Analysis, we obviously provide such information on our channel. There are myriad such other platforms out there. Do you not think that this is almost a good thing, that the traditional gatekeepers of information or the official accepted line are being challenged on their own turf?
I think it's absolutely a good thing. The problem that we have right now is that we have not yet advanced to the stage where one is able to find consistent, credible, trustworthy sources that one can actually rely on. And that becomes the problem, because curation is, I think, the real challenge. If the risk of disinformation right now in the world today comes from the fact that you don't have those curated, credible sources. Now, when you have a scenario where you cannot trust all of these bastions of credibility that we've had for the longest period, you try to turn to alternative sources, but you need to find alternative sources at the same time that align with your interests. So let's take business news, for example. So how do you actually get a sense of what is credible information in terms of tracking the state of the world's economy if you happen to be a middle-aged person who's interested in actually planning for a retirement and you don't want your retirement savings to go down the tubes, and you have to end up looking for credible sources of information in that area? Where do you get something like that? Now, you can end up going along to your mainstream business publications. And guess what? You discover that those mainstream business publications generally have people writing for them who happen to be wined and dined by particular investment houses with a view to persuading the audience of that particular publication that they're the next best thing. So you can then end up finding credible sources of information, such as yourselves. So I go through a range of newsletters from a range of sources on a daily basis. I tend to start off my day that way. Certainly the information that I get from you guys, I subscribe to stuff that comes out from the Free Market Foundation. I follow all of the mainstream guys. So I check out what CNN is saying. I check out what the BBC is saying. And it's almost like I have to have this range of filters that are in place all the time that says, well, when I'm getting this information from CNN, I have to be very wary of the fact that I know where their biases are. When I'm getting information from Russia Today, I have to be very wary because for exactly the same reason. In the case of the Chinese, one doesn't need those filters because they never provide you with real information. But be that as it may, the idea right now that until we can get to the point where we have people who are curating information, and it has to be proper curation, not what passes for fact checking. We have all of these various groups like Africa Check, for example, and the kind of stuff that they fact check is not really going to make much of a difference in terms of most people's lives. It's generally a question of saying, aha, you see, he lied, which, is not going to tell you whether, is the economy actually going to tank spectacularly over the next period because of the fact that Joe Biden has closed off the Keystone Pipeline, and that means that oil prices are going to go up around the world, and therefore the South African economy is going to take a nosedive because so much of what we pay is in terms of taxes. Now, where do you find any media house that is connecting those various threads together? That, for me, is the real problem, that people who need to make intelligent decisions about their lives, they actually don't have a path to truth, if one could look at it that way.
Well, thank you very much, Kanthan. Let's hand over to you, our viewers. Why do you think the media is suffering from a crisis of credibility? My name is David Ansara. This is the Center for Risk Analysis. Until next time, take care.